Hey, welcome to the last step of this mini course within the Extra Mile. This is also the last lesson of this introductory module, and we're going to take that base mesh that has the optimized topology and all the details that we created in the previous lesson, put it into Substance 3D Painter for texturing, and then final render within Marmoset Toolbag 4. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so a quick recap. This is where we left off. This is our high-res mesh. We went ahead and exported as an FBX. We also exported a low-resolution version, which is the one that we're going to import into Substance 3D Painter. So we end up with a couple of FBXs. Now let's go ahead and jump into Substance 3D Painter. So here is 3D Painter. I have a custom UI. So if you have something that looks slightly different, don't worry, it is exactly the same thing. It's just that I organize my windows in a slightly different way. But as part of the resources of this lesson, you can go ahead and import the custom UI. So in the resources, you'll find 4 files. You have this IPNG, it's just a texture image that I created for the eye. You have the texturing custom UI. That's the one that you can import, and you basically see exactly what I have in here in terms of the arrangement of the windows. And you have a couple of smart materials. We're going to get to them in just a second, but I just wanted to cover what the resources are for this specific video. All right, so if you want to load the custom UI, all you have to do is go to Window, go to Load UI, and select that file that says texturing custom UI.spui. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you again. These are the 2 FBX files that we exported in the previous lesson, the low and high. So the idea is to load the low resolution mesh into Painter and then reference the high resolution mesh to create the baking and all the details. So what I'm going to do is put this outside of the window and just click and drag on the low res mesh and drop it into the viewport. So this window will pop up. I'm going to leave everything as default. Make sure that the resolution is set to 4K. The rest is all default. Make sure that you don't have any of these boxes ticked. We're not going to go through any of that. But again, this should be the default options anyway. So let's click OK. And now we have our character within Substance 3D Painter. Now, a couple of things that I like to do straight away is just to fix this kind of like pixelation towards the edges or the anti-alias. And for that, we're going to go to the viewport display or the display settings here. And we're going to scroll down to where it says activate temporal anti-aliasing. I want to enable that and increase these iterations or accumulations. So you see, it just cleans everything up a little bit. The other thing I like to do is go to the camera. So the camera settings in here and reduce the field of view a little bit, just so that I can flatten things a bit more. And I think that looks great. Let's go ahead and close this up. And we are ready to start the texturing process. So the first thing to do is generate those details from the high-res mesh, because this is the low-res mesh. So let's go ahead and click on Texture Set Settings. And remember, I'm going to cover everything in a lot more detail. I'm going to explain why certain things are the way they are, how to approach this in different ways, different workflows when we get to it. But in this video, we're going for speed and brevity. So I'm just going to show you the settings and the buttons that you need to click to get something going straight away. So let's click on Bake Mesh Maps. And this new window will pop up. Again, I will explain this in a lot more detail later on. I'm just going to change the output size to be 4K just to match the document size that we have. And in this window right here, in the high poly parameters, I'm going to click on this icon to load or reference that high-res mesh. So from the browser, I'm going to go ahead and click on Head High, click Open. And once it's loaded, you see that we have this blue new display. So what I'm going to do is get a little bit closer here. And this extra area that you see that is kind of like transparent, that is your cage. So we will be able to change this max frontal distance just by sliding this in and out. And the idea is to get this closer to the mesh. This is basically the projection. Again, I'll cover that in a lot more detail later on. But the only thing that you want to keep an eye on is that you don't have any of these red areas, because those areas won't be baked. So we just need to make sure that we don't have any of those. So something like this should be okay. And the only settings that I'm going to change in the common settings, that's what I have selected here. Here in the match, I'm going to click on always, and I'm going to select by mesh. So by mesh is going to look at the suffix that we set in the FBX. Remember, I mentioned the underscore low and the underscore high were important. Just as a quick reminder, again, that's what we did here in ZBrush. So we export the name of the subtool plus the underscore high and underscore low, depending on the mesh. So that's what we're going to reference in here. So the only thing that we need to do is change this to by mesh name. On a side note, you can actually put any name or any word that you want in the suffix and just change it here if you want to. But the defaults are low and high, so it just makes perfect sense to do the same thing in ZBrush. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and click on Bake Selected Textures. And we're just going to wait until Substance 3D Painter goes through the process of generating all those details into a normal map, into the ambient occlusion, the cavity, all of that from the high-res mesh. All right, so once it's finished, we can go ahead and click on Return to Paint Mode. And now you can see that we have all those nice details and we have a bunch of maps or mesh maps that are generated from that bake. Perfect. So we just essentially baked the maps from the high-res mesh into the low-res mesh. So at this point, we can just go ahead and create a fill layer, for example. And let's use this one as our base. Let's go to properties. We can change this to a green color, like so. And then we can create another layer. This time we can make it kind of like a red color. And I'm just going to use this one to show you an example of why the mesh maps are so important. So I have these red and green layers. So for the red one, I'm going to create a black mask, like so. And then I'm going to click on generators here from the Magic Wand. So this generator applies to this specific black mask, and I can click on generator, and I can go for something like ambient occlusion, for example. So this ambient occlusion is going to look at the inputs that we just baked, and you see it is basically hiding certain parts of this red mask based on the ambient occlusion. And of course, we can click on the ambient occlusion or the generator, and we can change the balance. We can also invert it. Maybe we want the red areas to go towards the ambient occlusion. And just like that, we can start generating something that looks really, really complex. Again, this is something that is part of the more advanced workflow when we get to texturing. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this except the first one, because you need to have something in there. And this is where we're going to start using some of the resources that I prepared for you. So let's go ahead and load some of the resources. I have the creature skin base and I have the dark skin pattern. So this YGT is just the name of this mini course. You got this creature skin base, and the same thing for the dark skin pattern. So the way that you load these resources or these smart materials into Painter is really simple. I'm just going to select both, drag and drop them into your library, which is this one right here, not into the viewport. This time needs to be directly into the library. And as soon as you do that, let me move this out of the way, you get this import resource window that allows you to select the type of resource that you're importing. And because the extension is SPSM, it recognizes that it's a smart material, so we can just leave it as it is. And you can choose to current session, which means just for the time being that you're working here, the project, which I haven't saved. And if you want to have them always available to you, you can include it into your library. So I have already done that. I have already included them into my library. So I can just go ahead and cancel this. And I can go to my smart materials, which is this second tab here. And I can type YGT to sort of like filter by those initials. That's the reason I save them like that. And I have the creature skin base and I have the skin pattern. So all we need to do really is take this smart material and drag and drop it into the skin of the character. And just like that, we have something a lot more interesting, a lot more complex that we can start playing around with. Now, again, the purpose of this mini course is just to get something going of high quality that is easy to turn around and easy to create, but you can totally customize it and spend a lot more time tweaking these things. And once we get to the proper texturing module, you will be able to create your own smart materials, a smart mask, your own tools, and save them in your library to work this way. So in other words, once you understand the full process, you can do what I just did, which is create my own resources. I open up a new file, drag and drop it, and then I can tweak things. Now, if you want to tweak these colors for this character, you can open up the folder that is created. And you see I have prepared a couple of things. So you have the color correct, you have the hue control, and you have this color breakup. Right? So basically, this is the real base of the texture. You see, we have a folder for details and a folder for base. So I'm going to go into a lot more details later on, but just so that you're aware, the base color basically gives you a set of variation in terms of color. If I go ahead and switch the channel to a base color, you see we have a very rich albedo texture straight away. And all of these layers are the ones that are contributing to create this sort of pattern. And we're going to build all of that later on. So that is the base. Now, in terms of the details, if I turn this on, you see that's when I started using generators and custom masks to darken certain parts of the skins and wrinkles and things like that. Let's go back to material. But that's essentially what the details folder is doing. Right? Now, on top of that, I have this color breakup, which is just a color match effect. I'm going to turn it on. And you see, it just darkens some areas right here. And I'm basically using a mask editor. So if I go ahead and press the Alt key and go into the mask editor, this is basically what this is doing. So you can just go ahead and play around with the global balance and adjust this mask as much as you want to. That is the idea with this color breakup, just to vary things a little bit. And you can, of course, select the color match here and change the color or the target color to anything you want. So you can just go for more of a green tone, anything that you want, really. So it's quite customizable in that sense. Then the next thing is the hue control. We can enable that, and we can click on HSL Perceptive. Again, this is just a simple effect that I'm going to cover later on, but this allows you to change the hue of everything below this effect. So we can just play around with something a bit more saturated and a bit darker. You know, have a lot of fun just playing around with these things. This is what I spend most of my time just adjusting these little hues and you know, all of that. So I'm going to click on restore to default, set it back to 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and then maybe let's switch it back a bit and desaturate it. All right. The next one is the color correct. So this is another effect. If I click on color correct here, you need to select the effect, not the actual layer. You have the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So this allows you to change the contrast in just the shadows, right? The luminosity as well to just the shadows, and the saturation as well in just the shadows. Same thing for midtones and highlights. It's kind of like your color balance, but more towards the contrast and the luminosity of each part of or each value of the texture. So really, really helpful stuff. You can just go ahead and play around with this, get something that you like. And because it is non-destructive, you can go back to, let's say, the color match and switch this back to some more of a blue purple tone. And there we go. So that is basically it. This is the first step, just to set up the texture base. And now we can go ahead and drop the next one on top. So this is the dark skin pattern. I'm going to drop it again into the base mesh. And straight away, you see that it changes things quite a bit. So this is basically another set of layers that I prepared that also have a difference in terms of the height. So hopefully you can see the difference in terms of the height. And you can control all of that as well. And it's also changing a little bit of the roughness as well. So you see the roughness in these sort of darker areas are a bit more reflective. All right, so this whole folder, this entire folder is using a custom mask. Again, you can just go ahead and click on the mask, and we can go ahead and play around with the global balance to spread or reduce the reach of this effect. And within this one, let's go ahead and go through them really quickly. We have a base, we have a color variation 1 and a color variation 2. So that is what is giving me let's actually press the shift key and click on the mask just to hide it temporarily. So you see that these 3 colors is what is giving me this color variation. And then I have the height control. Now let's go ahead and bring back the mask, holding shift and clicking on the mask. This is the one that is basically giving me the extra detail. So right now there's no height information. If I enable height control, that's when we have that. So you can click on this height control and go to the slider here. I have it set to 0.02, but you can just change this to minus or, you know, exaggerate it. I wouldn't just go for something too intense. 0.02 is plenty. And in fact, you can just go ahead and blur things a little bit. Now, the next one is just another effect layer, just like I showed you before, an HSL Perceptive. So let's enable that. And we can take this HSL Perceptive and basically play around with the color. So just like that, I'm kind of like creating something rather different from what I have in the actual concept. Let me just bring that up. So I have it here. So you see it's more on the red hues than the greens that I had before. And that's just to show you how versatile and non-destructive this workflow is. You can just go ahead and change this completely. All right, so one thing that you notice is that I have more of a custom pattern in the skin, or at least in these darker areas, and even here in the center, center of the mouth and the chin. So that is where the custom or manual painting comes into play. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of that. So in this mask or the dark skin pattern, what I'm going to do is from the magic wand, add paint. So this is basically a layer that allows you to paint. I'm also going to enable symmetry with this icon right here. And from the settings of the symmetry, the one right next to it, I'm going to click on show intersection. So that way I don't see that, that line going through it. But if you prefer to actually see the symmetry, you can just leave it like that or show a plane. It's totally up to you. All right, so now that we have symmetry, let's go ahead and clear this filter, and let's go for the brushes right here. And I'm going to go for something like this dirt. And I think this one is going to be a rather good one. And let's go ahead and hold Control, right click and left to increase the brush size. So there's a quick shortcut. You can also use the slider, by the way. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to start painting with a white color around this area. So this is what allows you to, further customize the mask that you created. So I'm just going to add a bit of color around here and maybe towards the back as well. And I'm trying to create some kind of pattern where this darker color is more prominent as almost like a hard shell, even though it's not hard, towards the back and around the the top as well. So you see, it's just adding a little bit of extra color. Now I'm going to go ahead and press the X key on my keyboard, or you can also go down to the bottom here of the properties of the paint and change this to black. This is basically what the X color or the X key does, just switches between colors. So now with black, we're still painting in this mask. I'm going to actually remove some of these details. Let's go ahead and reduce the brush size. And I'm just going to go towards the, around the eye area, like so. Maybe I don't want to have that darkness towards the lips, and reduce a bit of that sort of hard shells towards the more, I would say, flappy areas, or where the flesh should be, and also reduce it towards the center. So you see, we're creating more of a custom pattern. Now, there's a couple of other things. If you look at the reference, there's these sort of patterns as well, kind of like leaks of striations as well of this color. So what we can do for that is select the dirt right here. So this is a different one, but you can use any brush. Feel free to explore any brush that you want. And from here, what I'm going to do is reduce the brush again. And I'm going to switch back to a white color. And I'm going to start sort of like pushing this like in, like so. All right, so this is how I created those more custom lines. Of course, you don't have to create the same pattern. I would just advise that you play around with this idea of customizing the mask, but it doesn't have to be the same pattern. You don't have to do exactly the same concept. It's more about the workflow, and the idea is to produce something, like I've been mentioning, of high quality relatively quickly. All right, so that is the idea with the custom mask, and you can just spend a bit more time doing that. Now, on top of this, let's go ahead and create a custom paint just to variate the colors a bit more. That is not using, let's say, anything from the library. We're going to create something from scratch. Let's collapse this, and let's create a new fill layer. And we're going to call this one color var, as in color variation. So for this color variation, we don't really need any of the channels. We just need color. So what I can do is press the Alt key and click on color. And that way I sort of hide everything but color. It's kind of like isolating just the color. And I'm going to click on the color and let's go for something very intense, like a light blue, like so. And I'm also going to change the blending mode, just like you have in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on the drop down here, and I'm going to set it to overlay. So you see, just by doing that, we have a completely different creature very quickly, and I think this looks pretty cool. So what I'm going to do with this is bring a custom mask to hide it. So let's click on the mask, black mask. So now this black mask is a full color. It's like a full black color, so you don't see anything. And then we can go ahead and do the same process that we did before, add an effect, add a paint layer. We still have symmetry selected, and we can go with a different brush just to mix it up a bit. Let's go with this cement 2. And basically, we now have a white color, and we can start revealing this blue color wherever we feel like it could work. So I'm just going to target around the eyes just to darken these areas and make it a bit more bluish, and also maybe the mouth. So, a lot of fun to just play around with this variation in color and create some kind of like skin pattern. Maybe we can do something towards the, I don't know, maybe towards the deltoids, just starting to change the color towards the bottom area. Some areas here on the neck as well would be interesting, and the nose. So you see, it's not everywhere, but just doing this tiny bit of adjustments can change things quite a bit and create something that looks really, really complex with, in no time. All right. So there we go. So we have a much more interesting color, and it's just a single layer set to overlay. So if I turn this on and off, you see it has a pretty big impact into how it looks. All right, so feel free to play around with this idea of custom layers and custom masks. Again, we're gonna play with this a lot more when we get to it in the texturing module. But I'm gonna leave this workflow here because it shows already the process and the steps, and it is a lot of fun and really easy to do. So to finalize the texturing of this character, I'm gonna go ahead and drop in the other resource that we have here, which is the eye. So let's go ahead and drag and drop this PNG file to the library. And again, we have this pop-up window. Now, this is a PNG, so we need to define what type of texture this is. So we can click on this drop-down, and we're going to go for texture. So it is not an alpha, not a color LUT, not an environment. It's just a texture. And let's go ahead and set it to the library. Again, I have already done that, so I have this texture in my library. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this icon that is to filter the textures, and I'm going to type eye. All right, so obviously, because we had the texture set of the eye called eye, so it's showing you all the bakes and all the mesh maps that we created. and it also shows you the texture. So let's go ahead and click on the texture set list and select the eyes. So now we can also go into solo mode by pressing Alt and Q so that you see just shows the eyes. And let's go to the layers. And what I'm going to do is click and drag and drop it into the eye directly. So this is a really fun way of doing things. I'm going to show you a couple. So if you just drag and drop it in there, we can select the channel that we're targeting, in this case, base color. And now we have this kind of like projection that I think works quite well. We can just go ahead and reposition this whatever we want to, like so. And with this projection, we don't have the ability to use symmetry. However, we can go ahead and duplicate this and do a couple of masks. So let's go ahead and do another one. Just click and drag and drop it in here and base color. And you see, we now have it on the other side. So they're going to be in different layers, but that allows you to, work around with those. So you can just make something that looks a little bit weird like so. But anyway, that's the idea. So let's go ahead and place this a little bit better. And this is the tool that allows you to project the texture based on the normal. That's why this square that you see here like moves around. But you can also select this icon to scale it, to move it around, and to rotate it. So I'm going to click on scale, click on this box here in the center. Let's go ahead and do that. And that's how I increase the size of the iris. Let's do the same thing for the other side. And I'm kind of like eyeballing it, but you can just type the same numbers on each one of them. All right, and you see that there is this tiny pattern here on the eye that is in the same, that is in the same place on the other side. So just to vary things a little bit, I'm gonna click on rotate, and I'm gonna rotate it slightly so that we can change a little bit of the look and feel of the eye. But that's about it. It's very, very easy when you have a simple texture that you want to just drag and drop. So this is a quick technique to generate some interesting eyes. If you have a photograph or a really good texture, you can just drop it in like so. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to click on a new layer just to drop it on top. And this time I want to control the roughness of the eye just with this layer. So just like we did with the color variation for the body, I'm going to hold the Alt key and click on rough. And that way I can control the roughness of the eye. So I'm going to drop this all the way to 0 so that it is very reflective. So we can see the reflection of the environment. Perfect. So that's about it. Now, one thing that you notice is that the colors maybe of the eye are slightly different from the from the rest of the body. So if you want to play around with the colors and integrate things a bit more, something else that you can do, let's go ahead and collapse this or remove this filter. Let's go to this fourth icon, which is the effects. And I'm going to type HSL, which I've used in the past, this one right here. And I'm going to drag and drop this on top. So this is going to look at everything that is below it. And it's kind of like adding this hue saturation value to it. So again, I'm going to go ahead and play around with some variations of color. Maybe a red intense color might be interesting, and reduce the lightness a bit. So I think that's a bit more interesting, and it's definitely something, an alternative to what I have here on my reference, but I think it looks cool. All right, so that's it for this very quick texturing process. Let's go ahead and move this away. And the next step would be to export the textures and render it in Marmoset Toolbag 4. So the exporting process is actually really simple. I'm going to go to File, go to Export Textures. You can select where you want to export it, and we're going to go ahead and select a different template. Let's go ahead and click on this dropdown, and let's find the PBR roughness or metal roughness, this one right here. So PBR metal roughness, you can click on that. And that's pretty much it in terms of the things that I'm going to change. The only thing might be that the body, if we select this individual sort of texture set, the body is set to 4K, which is fine. But the eyes are also set to 4K, which I think they might be a little bit too intense for just the eyes. So you can just go ahead and click on this icon right here and change it to maybe 1K, right? That's totally up to you. And then go back to global settings and click on export. Now that's all that is required, and I have already done it, so I'm not going to do it again, but you can just go ahead and export it, and it will export to the path that you selected. All right, so let's go ahead and fire up Marmoset Toolbag 4 so that we can set a quick render for our concept. All right, so to set up things in Marmoset is actually really simple, and the reason I chose Marmoset is because of its simplicity and the quality that you can get straight away. However, when we get to the rendering module, you see that I cover a bunch of different tools and different software to basically give you different avenues that you can have to render your concepts. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the low resolution mesh into Marmoset, and I'm going to use the one that I use as my reference, this one right here, just because it has slightly different UVs from the one I've been showing you. And obviously the texture that I previously exported are not going to match if the UVs are different. So let's go ahead and drag and drop it into the viewport. this one right here, and you'll see that it already has some kind of pose. So let me cover this one really quickly in case you want to pose your character. Again, it's not, you know, like a very extreme or dynamic pose, but it certainly kind of like changes the asymmetry of the character and makes it a bit more interesting. So in case you want to pose your character or this really quick concept, let's go back into ZBrush. And this is our low-res mesh. What I want to do is click on the Z plugin palette, and let's collapse this one. You have this transpose master in here, and by default, I think the layer should be off. So let's go ahead and click on T-pose mesh, and basically this process combines whatever subtools that you have in your subtool list into a single one. So that makes the process of posing your character really, really easy. So I'm gonna press the X in my keyboard just to enable symmetry. And I'm also going to press Control key to access my masking tools. I have already selected the lasso, but you can just, by default, it should be pen or the mask pen. So I'm going to click on that and go to mask lasso. And I'm going to click and drag around just to mask this entire area. And if I press the Control key on the mask, it's going to blur it. I can also press Control and click on the canvas to invert it and just click on the mask again to blur it again. Still, I'm pressing Control. And the idea is just to create a nice fade like so between the head and the body. Let's go ahead and invert it. Control click on the canvas, and then I'm going to bring in the gizmo, and let's get rid of the symmetry. I'm going to hold the Alt key just to unlock temporarily the gizmo. You see I'm changing the lock here. So I'm going to place this somewhere around there and rotate it like so, and that way I can sort of manipulate the head. All right, so I'm just going to try to recreate something similar to what I had in that original concept, but again, it's very, very subtle. Let's go ahead and hold Control and click to invert the selection, and I can just move the body slightly like so, clear the mask, and then we can sort of rotate things forward a bit like so. Again, it's just a matter of like playing around with this, but it is very, very simple. Now, another thing that I like to do at this stage, and again, I'm going to cover all of this in depth when we get to posing our character, is to use the Move Topological or the Move Brush to add a tiny bit of asymmetry, maybe a suggestion of an expression to the character. So I'm just going to move these points slightly, like so, and maybe make things look slightly different for these sort of like flaps around the character. All right, but that's about it, really. So once you complete your pose, you can just go ahead and click on the Z plugin palette again. And this time I'm going to enable layer. So this layer is going to take whatever change that we did, whatever pose we created, and put it into a layer. So we can turn that on and off to visualize the pose or not. So let's leave this one on and click on T-pose to sub T. And that's it. So now we have a pose, and you see that we still have, if we open up the geometry palette, we still have all the subdivision levels, right? And if we scroll down to layers, you see we have this layer now for the pose, and we can turn this on and off. So this is a very powerful workflow. So at this point, what you can do is re-export your low resolution mesh with the pose if you want to have that pose in your render. So that's pretty much what I have in here. All right, so let's go ahead and set up the materials for this character. I'm just going to delete some of these default materials as well. And let's click on a new one. I want to call this one body. And let's create another one. And I'm going to call this one eyes as well. So what I'm going to do is drop the body into the body and the eyes into the eyes. And I think for some reason, I split the eyes, I think for the pose. So basically, you see I have two eyes. So that I think I did it just so that I can rotate the eye. So if I select, let's say, let's turn everything off. So if I select the left eye, you see the pivot is right there. So if I rotate it, it's not going to rotate in place. So let me just double check that I'm doing correctly. Yeah. So I can go ahead and click on this icon right here to translate it. And you see that Marmoset has this edit pivot. So I'm going to click on edit pivot and click on center pivot. So now it is right in the center. I'll do the same thing for the other eye. I'm going to click on edit pivot and center pivot. And the only reason I did that is so that I can rotate the eyes around based on the texture. So I'll show you what that means in just a second. But that is the reason I have actually 3 objects instead of 2. And by the way, just to cover that as well, if I go into my subtool palette, click on the eyes, I can actually separate this by, let's get rid of the symmetry and let's double check the geometry. I'm going to delete higher. We don't need it anymore because we already have the details anyway. So I can hold Control and Shift to hide this one, and I can go to the split hidden that we used before. So now we have the separate eye. So that's basically what I had in here. All right, so I'm going to select the body and let's expand this a little bit more. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop the textures that correspond to these different slots. So I'm going to take the albedo or the base color and drop it into the albedo. and make sure that the body is applied to the body. And if you don't see the change straight away, just make sure that in the dropdown here, it's not set to gray. It's actually set to either full draft or draft quality. So I'm going to click on full quality, and now you can see the texture. And the next thing will be the normal. I'm going to drag and drop the normal here. And I think that at the time that I exported this, I used a slightly different template from the PBR metal roughness. So the normal map is kind of like inverted. Hopefully you can see. So I'm just going to click on this flip Y just to invert it so that the actual details are working fine. You shouldn't have to do any of this because the template that we use for the export in this lesson should have the normal map correctly. But just in case the normal or the details look slightly different or weird, just flip the Y channel. All right, so the roughness goes to the roughness. I don't have any metalness, so it's just a black image. So I'm not gonna even worry about that. And just in case you wanted to export a occlusion, you can just drop it in here. So I'm just gonna drop my occlusion in here and just drop the intensity a bit. All right, so for the eyes, let's go ahead and double click the eyes material. The only texture that I really care about is the color, so I can delete the rest of the textures. Let's drop that into the albedo. And we can control the roughness just with this slider, so I can do all of this. Let's push it all the way down to 0, so it is very reflective. So that is looking good. And what I mentioned about the different sort of like textures around the eyes, if I select this eye, I can now rotate it around from marmoset, so I can sort of make him look towards the camera. Something else that I did that I don't know if you noticed, but the pupil on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side is slightly bigger. It's a bit subtle, but it's slightly bigger. I don't know. I just did that intentionally just to make sure that it's a bit more interesting. This is the type of things that I tend to do when I'm doing the texturing, but I thought I'd mention it. All right, so you see I'm just kind of like rotating those eyes to make him look more towards the camera and create sort of the same angle for the render. So speaking of render, let's go ahead and set up the camera first. I'm going to click on this camera here just to create a new one and double click on it. Let's call it render. And let's also go ahead and click on save frame, and we can increase the frame opacity just to see exactly what the camera sees. We can also change the field of view just to flatten that perspective a little bit more. And that way we can see a bit more of this nice shape for the head and the flaps as well on the neck. All right, so this one is probably too widescreen for this kind of like portrait. So what we can do is go to the render tab here, and we can scroll down to the output image, and we can set this to, let's say, 2000 by 2000. All right, so that gives me this more of a squarish format, and we can sort of like find a nice angle for the camera, like so. So I think I'm happy with this. And let's go ahead and save the framing of this camera by just clicking on this lock. So that way we don't move, or we cannot move the camera. And we can go ahead and split this view now. So this is something that I'm going to cover later on in the rendering module, but I like to work with a split view. So I'm going to click on this icon and click on split vertical. And I'm going to switch from the render to the main camera here. All right, so basically this is what we're going to be rendering. This is what we can sort of work around. We can also change from full quality to gray. We don't need the full quality in here. And now we can start playing around with the lighting and the render settings. So let's click on the render settings here. And the first thing I like to do is enable the ray tracing. That is going to give us the ray tracing quality. As you can see, it's a lot more interesting. And the next thing would be to change or edit the sky or the ambient light. So let's click on sky. Let's change the mode from ambient sky to color, and we can go ahead and select a black color. And that sort of presents the character a little bit better. It sort of highlights the silhouette a bit more. We can go ahead and press the shift key and right click to move this environment around. And I think this one is a good one, but let's go ahead and play with a different one. I'm going to click on library, and let's go for something different. Let's go for, let's try this one around. So that one has a nice soft light. Let's try this one as well. I think this is the one that I use, but again, it's totally up to you. You can just play around with different environments and see what works for your render. So I'm going to go for this one because it has a nice light coming from the back. So I'm going to hold the shift key and right click just to move it a little bit. So I think this one is a good kind of like edge light coming from the back. So I'm going to leave it as it is. And let's go ahead and create our key light and our fill light. So when I talk about the fill and the key light, I'm referring to this sort of more yellowish prominent light coming from the top right. And that's the key light. And then the fill light is this blue light coming from the left-hand side. So let's do the key light first. And this is a really cool trick that I'm going to cover later on, but I'm going to click on this icon to create a new light. Let's double click and call it key. And let's do another one. And let's call this one fill. And when you click on this icon, it's going to automatically create these spotlights, and it's going to be created from the camera view. The cool thing is that you can select the light So I can just go ahead and click on light and fill. And that way, from this angle, I can move my camera, and I'm essentially moving the source of the light. I want to increase the brightness so that you can really see what I'm doing on the render. So on the left-hand side, I'm literally looking through the light. So as I move the camera, I change the light, and I think I have the fill selected. Let's do it again. Key light. There we go. So now I can just go ahead and move it, and you see in real time what I'm doing. So again, the left-hand side is kind of like looking through that camera. So I'm going to position this around here. And we can also increase the diameter so that we can blur the shadows a little bit more, just a tiny bit. We can also play with the spot angle, so that reduces the reach of that light or that spot. So I'm going to increase a tiny bit and reduce the spot sharpness. So I'm going to make it a bit more subtle. And of course, we can play around with the color. So let's tint this a little bit with a warmer tone. I think that sort of helps with the color palette that we chose. So let's increase the brightness a bit. And that's about it, really. So before, after, right? So this kind of like brings the character into the light. Now let's go ahead and select the fill light. So enable fill, and let's make sure that we select the fill light here. And for this one, we're gonna go for a bluish tone. I'm gonna exaggerate it so that we can really see the effect and increase the brightness. And let's go ahead and push it towards the left-hand side. We're also gonna increase the diameter, so it is more of a soft light coming from the back, the top back, and reduce the sharpness as well. So something like that. I think this is producing a nice fill color from the left-hand side. And of course, we can go back to the color itself and play around with the type of hue. And I'm gonna reduce the intensity, obviously, to something a bit more realistic. And at the moment, I think the intensity is very close to the key light, so we can also reduce the brightness so that it's a bit more subtle. And you can just keep playing around with these settings and these lights. In fact, if I bring in my reference, you see that we have more of a highlight here on the top right. So if you want to recreate that, again, you can just click on a new light, and let's name this one rim or edge. Let's select it here from the drop down, and we can just push this one towards the top and try to replicate that sort of highlight as well. And let's give it a bluish tint as well. And we can play with the diameter and the brightness. So that's kind of like similar to what I have here. That is the idea. Maybe that's a little bit too intense. All right, so the final thing to wrap up this concept is to actually render it. So one thing I like to do is select the camera. So let's click on the camera render right here. This icon selects the settings. I'm gonna toggle off the lock so that I can edit it. And we can go to focus. We can click on ray tracing and click on sticky focus. And you see everything gets blurred a little bit. If I hold Control Shift and the left click on my mouse, I'm gonna click on the eye. You see that this point is now the focal point. And I can just go ahead and play around with this slider. I'm just clicking and dragging to adjust it. So I'm gonna reduce it a little bit. So just wanna have a tiny bit of depth of field going on here. And the final thing that I like to do to create this very nice render is add a bit of subsurface scattering. So in the reference, you see that we have a little bit of redness in these thin areas, the eyelids and all of that. So that is the SSS effect, or the subsurface scattering, and that is a material setting. So for that, the first thing I need to make sure I do is check the scale of the scene. So let's go ahead and click on this gear icon here and click on Show Scale Reference. And you see we have, let's close this up. You see we have this massive reference compared to the head. So we can click on the scene and we can scale this by, let's go for 20. And that sounds okay. Maybe 30, or actually let's go for 15. This is basically scaling the overall scene. So I think this is more in line. Let's try 5, maybe 10. All right. So roughly the head of this humanoid character is going to be similar to the head of this guy. So let's go ahead and close this one up, or hide it again. And I just realized that I changed the scale of the scene after I moved the eyes and the pivot. So that's not going to be any good. Let me just go ahead and fix this by re-importing the character. So I'm going to delete this and re-import the character again. Let's go ahead and check the scene once again. So the scale of the scene is correct now. Let's go ahead and drag and drop the materials back to the eyes and to the character. And I should have checked the scene scale before all of this, because we probably have to reposition our cameras and our lights again. So I'm going to start with the key light, and let's select the key light. And because the scale changes, the intensity also changes. Not the position, sorry, the intensity. So it's going to select each one of these lights and go back and push the intensity a little bit. And just because of the scale of the scene, the intensity of the light, is going to decay a lot faster or, a lot slower. So all I've done is just going through each one of these lights and increasing or decreasing the light. But that's about it. So now that I have the right scene, I can select my eyes. So let's select this guy and let's do the same thing, edit pivot, center pivot, and I can rotate it around, just pointing at the camera. So you should actually change the scene. This is something that I forgot to mention. Change the scene beforehand. All right, that also means that we can take the camera and we can play with this depth of field a little bit more. So that is going to change also based on the scene. But the main reason why I changed the scale of the scene is so that we can get that subsurface scattering. So I'm going to go ahead and select the body. And in the transmission here, right now is disabled. So I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to click on volumetric scattering. So just by doing that, in fact, let's go ahead and enable full quality as well so we can get closer here. We start to see this really nice, subsurface scattering and translucency of the material. And we can play with the depth as well. So if I increase it quite a bit, obviously that is going to change things and make things look unrealistic. This is kind of like an embryo type of thing, which might be what you're going for, but in our case, I'm just gonna drop it back to something like that. So you see we're getting a bit of the redness coming through. This also should be subtle, again, depending on the material that you're creating. So something like this, I think it works fine. So let's drop this back to the gray, and we now have the nice quality of the material. Again, we're going to cover a lot of this later on, but as you can see, very quickly, we can generate something that looks really, really cool. Now, the final step will be to select the render settings. Let's go back to this dropdown where it says render cameras. Right now, the default one is the main camera, so it's going to render this view. What I want to do is click on add new, add render. So that's going to render this one out, and I'm going to turn off the main camera. Now it's going to also render these settings. So I'm going to click on transparency so that the background or the black background is basically a transparent object, and the samples I'm going to go for 1024. That's about it. Now I can go ahead and click on render image, and it's going to produce this image with transparency. And that's it. Let's go into Photoshop. I'm going to take my concept that is rendered, and this is the final render from Marmoset. So I just went ahead and play around with the background. So I just created a new layer here, made it a black layer, and then I did a little bit of paint over in the background just to separate it a little bit more. So let me just show you the final concept and the layers that I use. Here we go. So this is the final concept. So before, after, I just added, as you can see, a tiny bit of shadow here at the top of the eye, right? And also some highlights you can see here. So this is all paint over, and obviously the background. So I have this sort of like smoky area separating the background. So I think this one works better as a presentation render, but overall I think is working quite nicely. So that's it for this mini course within the Extramile. These few lessons have been just to demonstrate or give you an overview of the things that we're going to be looking into in a lot more depth in the following modules. It's also to give you a quick win just to show you that you can do this. This is, once you know the steps and once you know the in-depth workflows, you can just run with it and create anything you like. But this is a very simple way to create something of high quality that looks cool and that you can show to the world. So hopefully this is getting you excited about what is coming in the next modules. I'll see you there.